Welcome back everyone to another Technique Coding programming tutorial. So in this video I want to go over a different navigation pattern for SwiftUI than you might have seen before, but you might have seen references to it when it comes to going online and trying to figure out navigation, and that is using UIKit for navigation rather than using SwiftUI navigation. There's a few reasons to do it this way. It's the way I actually it's the pattern that I use when it comes to my client apps, and there's plenty of reasons for that. Let's just get into that right now, and I'll show you really why I chose to keep UIKit as navigation. So one thing to keep a note of here is there are pros and cons to both of these. So the main pros when it comes to SwiftUI navigation is I wanted to keep under 3 here. There's more pros and cons to both of these, but I told myself I would keep it under 3. So one thing in SwiftUI navigation is you can use environment objects. This should actually be environment object. But you can use the environment. You can still use environment in the UIKit version of this, by the way. But it can I haven't really tested it as far as passing in simple values, but as far as environment for things like getting the theme, getting system-wide environment values, this is still valid with using UIKit. However, if you are trying to pass environment objects down to or across different views that are handled from UIKit, you can't pass them using environment objects. I'll show you why that's not really an issue here in a few minutes, but basically, since SwiftUI navigation is new, Apple's done a good job of trying to make it as simple as possible, although there are arguably difficulties with using it. So you could say that there is less boilerplate, but it actually kind of isn't at the same time. It depends on how you architect the app. In my opinion, there's actually a slight more boilerplate, only because of the nuances of SwiftUI, but I'll mention that briefly here moving forward. So the other thing is you can represent the navigation stack as a simple array. Now, if I go into my Xcode here, what I mean by that is if I go into my coordinator, and if you are trying to see where I'm getting this code, I'll put a link to the videos below. I went through all of this navigation in 2 videos for SwiftUI with my authentication class. I highly recommend you go back and just look at those little tidbits in there on what this code is, but all of that's handled in those videos. What I mean by that navigation is handled by a simple array is this right here. You can define in SwiftUI navigation, you can define your paths as a enum type, really just a hashable type, and then you can just switch out the path here, and SwiftUI should handle everything for you. Now, the problem with that though is that path object technically only handles these views right here. So in SwiftUI you have to have a root view right here, this area. This is your root view, and there could be more screens to that too, but you have to have a root view before this path object actually starts handling navigation. This path object right here technically is only handling these views. So whenever you push just one view on screen, what you're actually doing is you're pushing this view on screen, and then if you push another one on screen, you're pushing this one. These root views right here always exist in the navigation stack. You cannot get rid of it. And what that looks like is if you go in the nav core, this is the root of this project, you have to have a root view in here, and then after that all the navigation happens afterwards. I personally have a pet peeve with that. In my opinion, this path should handle all screens, and it should be up to the developer to say what the root view in this path is. Now, you can speculate on why it is currently the way it is, what have you, but in my opinion it shouldn't be that way. If I have a navigation stack, the navigation stack should be representative of the entire stack, not just on top of some arbitrary number of views. In any case, though, in UIKit, you don't have that problem, though, because your nav stack completely represents everything that's on screen. And you do that because these views right here, all of these, represented by a I'll abbreviate here, nav controller. It's a UI navigation controller. So one UI navigation controller can represent the entire stack of your app. And that's the goal here, that to simplify things in a way that makes sense, but also to use a more robust system. Now, the cons of the SwiftUI navigation, one, you have to have root views, like I just said. There are a couple other downsides, such as if you get a novice developer, which, let's be honest, every big project is going to onboard new developers. They may or may not actually know how to properly architect and handle SwiftUI data flows. I have seen it where you set up a navigation stack in SwiftUI, someone is mishandling an environment object or a state object or a observable object rather, and what happens is once state changes, it's going to affect the navigation stack, and you might see that navigation will do some odd things. Like you'll have a screen that pops off the navigation stack randomly. It'll just completely remove an entire flow. You'll see some odd things with SwiftUI because the entire nature of SwiftUI is reactive. It is meant to, because it's declarative, the system is meant to change based on the data. However, with that being said, if you mishandle the data, you can very easily get to a state where odd things happen in the navigation. UIKit actually sandboxes everything by creating a wrapper around each SwiftUI view, so you actually totally sidestep that issue. But we'll get to some of the cons of UIKit navigation here in a second. The other thing is, like I kind of hinted at, your architectural patterns with SwiftUI navigation, because it's so new, they're not as fleshed out. Now, in the videos that I did previously, I actually did use the coordinator pattern in here, which I think the way I have it is a step in the right direction at the very least, where you can have delegates calling back up, or you can have screens calling back up to their delegate, and the delegate, which is this coordinator, is handling navigation for us. Then you have to rely on SwiftUI. Then you adjust this path, and then you allow SwiftUI's navigation system to handle everything else from that point on. Now, this is definitely a cleaner pattern than just shoving everything into the view right here, but I still don't think it's as clean because you still have to populate the app's view areas with navigation. I just don't agree with that pattern personally. People have seen a lot of success with this, and you can still use it. And I do recommend, if you are starting a new app, at the very least, try this out, because like any other developer out there and any other thing in engineering, no one tool is going to save you from everything. So you still have to have this in your wheelhouse of tools at your disposal. But I'm just making the argument that, hey, right now we have two tools. We have SwiftUI and UIKit. Choose the better of the two in the situation. For me, because I usually work on legacy systems, I choose UIKit because most legacy systems, you just can't refactor an entire app into SwiftUI. That being said, I still use UIKit to start new projects, because if I ever have to switch to using a UIKit view controller, if for, say, whatever reason, SwiftUI doesn't have certain controls or capabilities that I need, I can very easily swap that out. So that being said, inside UIKit navigation, we have a more robust and proven architectural pattern when it comes to coordinators with UIKit. You can customize it pretty much to your heart's content. It's been out for years and years and years and years. It's been proven, it's been iterated on, it's been improved on. If you can't do something in UIKit when it comes to navigation, you're either doing something wrong or you don't know enough about UIKit yet. The other thing too is, like I said, you can solve for very complex navigational patterns, and it's much easier to share navigation flows across the app. I'm going to be doing a deep dive into the coordinator pattern in UIKit and in SwiftUI in future videos, but in future videos I'll show you that you can actually have just one protocol dictate an entire flow in UIKit, and then you could just adopt that protocol from different navigation objects, and then you just call that flow from that object. So if I have something like a auth flow, I can just call that auth flow from a main coordinator. Or if you're trying to share like a scheduler across your app and it has a specific flow to that, you can say this screen now, or this, we'll call this a nav controller or a coordinator. This coordinator adopts that protocol. That coordinator is now a valid flow use case for that scheduler flow. You can, so all you have to do is pop the protocol as an adopted protocol for each of your coordinators, and you're done. Versus in SwiftUI, where if I want to share this coordinator, I actually have to call the coordinator from a different view. Now, you can still share flows with SwiftUI, but instead of just adding a protocol, you have to then just it's very different. I know I'm not doing a good job of explaining it, and it's going to be much easier to explain this when it comes to actually writing down the code for this. But for my experience, I've noticed that there is some extra boilerplate with sharing UIKit, or sorry, SwiftUI navigation, because then you have to make sure that the data state is in an acceptable format to not mess up your past navigation. And you also have to instantiate your coordinators in inside of the views, which I again, I'm not a fan of, and make sure again that they don't adjust the data flow in the reactive data when you start them. There's a couple other things too with that when it comes to presenting and dismissing your flows in SwiftUI, that some of the nuances there might be a little confusing, but in UIKit, it's actually much, much easier. So going back to this, the one downside of UIKit, boilerplate. You're going to have more boilerplate in UIKit. It's not declarative, it's imperative. So you have to write out everything. That being said, once you get the basic boilerplate down, it tends to be much, much easier to reason about, at least in my opinion. The other downside too is if you're using this pattern, which is using SwiftUI within UIKit navigation, you need to know both UIKit and SwiftUI. It is a downside, but that being said, it is highly unlikely once you get into the industry that you will never see UIKit. It's just, you're always going to see it. So my argument is, since you're going to see it anyway, you might as well know at least the bare minimum of both of them. And this could be a really nice pattern to have under your belt anyway. The biggest downside I've seen on this, and it drives me nuts to this day, is SwiftUI loves to hijack the navigation bar. It just loves it. It's a balancing act between SwiftUI, using SwiftUI's navigation bar functionality, and UIKit's navigation bar functionality. I tend to only use the UIKit version of this because it's just, I have seen issues with trying to approach this from the SwiftUI side. It hasn't worked in my benefit so far. So you will come up with issues with the navigation bar, but once you solve for it once, it becomes a lot easier. But that being said, SwiftUI is still really odd when it comes to like pushing and pulling, or popping and pushing from like the navigation stack. So one screen, if you push from a SwiftUI screen with this pattern to a UIKit screen and then pop back, if you don't handle it correctly, you could see weird layout issues in the popped SwiftUI screen that you just got back to. So it's not without its issues. So really, there's pros and cons to both sides. It's up to the individual developer, or I should say the architect, because you really have to know these things kind of at heart to weigh the options here. It's up to that person, that individual, to make the conscious decision on which way to go on this pattern. I think for new developers, they are going to see a lot more right now on the SwiftUI side of things. But that being said, if they're getting into the field, they're going to see a lot more UIKit stuff when it comes to legacy code bases. And let's be honest, at this point, SwiftUI is only a few years old. Was it 5? I'd have to check that up. But it's not as old as UIKit. So you're going to see much, much more UIKit out in the field anyway. So let's get into the code a little bit here. And what I ended up doing was let's move this out of the way here. So here's the app that we made in the previous tutorials, in the previous classes. It's just a simple authentication app. You can put your name, stuff in here, you can hit submit, you can log in, you can fetch secure data, reset text, log back out, everything here. So this app is done. what I ended up doing was I brought all of that code in here except for the navigation stuff. So this app is actually the SwiftUI version. What I did was I brought all the code in here. So we're not going to go over all this stuff. Again, I'll put a link in the description below for the videos that go over all of this code. I'm not going to go over any of this other than the navigation today, but there are more things in here like the access token storage, network layer, all of that jazz. So, but right now what we have is we have a view. We have the SwiftUI views in the view models that actually talk to each of these views. So we have a login view, a register view, and if I log in again, make sure that I actually typed it in. This is the home view. So what we're going to be doing is, this is the UIKit Nav Coordinator, by the way. So I took this, and as you can see, there's going to be errors because it's not formatted for SwiftUI. So this is the UIKit version of this. Go back into the videos and look at the UIKit version of the nav controllers the coordinators, nav coordinators that I made in a previous video. See how they're made, but generally speaking, to convert this app to using SwiftUI views, it's not that difficult. It's actually going to be a lot easier than you think it is. So these are, like I said, these are existing SwiftUI views. Nothing too crazy here. Let me take this out here. Nothing too crazy here. Simple views. In order to use this from UIKit, we need to add one thing to each of these screens, and that is a hosting controller, a UI hosting controller. So for the home screen, let's just add one real quick here. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to say import SwiftUI, import UIKit. But before I get into this, what you'll notice is each one of these controllers has two things in common. One, well, first off, they represent a view, a SwiftUI view, and two, they're all going to have a view model. In order to save ourselves some time, I'm actually just going to add something real quick here, and it's going to be a new file, and it's going to be a base class for the UI hosting controller, but it's going to also accept a view model. So we're going to say hosting controller SwiftUI. We're going to say our class hosting controller. We're going to use some generics here. I'm going to minimize the left-hand column here so we have a little bit more room to work with. I'm going to say var view model is of type VM, and VM is just any object. You can make a base class with this. I have done that in the past, but honestly, with a lot of these view models, you're not sharing pretty much any functionality. I try to stuff all my shared functionality into protocols, aka protocol-oriented programming, which is a better pattern to use than subclassing in Swift. But you can subclass and make this into that base class if you want to. But generally speaking, any object really works. You can go crazy with this, I guess. Maybe observable object. I don't really do it this way, though. I just say any object, just to be a little bit more generic. In it, we're going to have a new initializer. We're going to take the content, type VM, and we're going to say self.view model, view model, super.init, root view. Let's just take it on the root view. And now, because we're not instantiating, because this is still a UI view controller under the hood, so it's going to have a initializer called init coder. that's usually used when you are instantiating a view from a storyboard. But we're not doing that. So, but we still have to override it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say precondition failure, because it's a precondition that we should not be using this initializer. Init coder implemented. Okay, so now that we have that, it's going to make our lives just a little bit easier when we're making these hosted controllers. So now what we can do is we can say, remember, I have a home view and a home view model. So back in the hosted controller, I'm going to say, go to my screens here, my reference material for everyone, so I don't accidentally make some mistakes here. Say class home hosting controller is of type hosting controller, and we're going to say home view. This is our SwiftUI home view right here. This is the actual SwiftUI view, and then home view dot view model. Now, real quick, if you're confused about this right here, the way I make view models is if I go into here, I actually make them in an extension of the SwiftUI view themselves. So that's why you see an extension of home view, and then we say view model in there. So it's namespacing essentially. I do that so I don't have to, it's one less thing I have to think about, and it does give you a little bit better of a code completion in some areas. This is very subjective. This isn't like better or worse. It's just different depending on what you like doing. So don't get it into your head like this is the end all be all, because so many people, there's pros and cons to this like anything else. But that's just the way I do it. So another thing that I do personally is I split up lifecycle methods into their own extensions. Now this might look like a little bit of overkill. It's just the way I organize things. So I usually do a git load, set up views, and then down here I make another extension. I should really make this type of stuff into a Xcode snippet so I can more easily and more quickly create these things, but laziness has prevailed over me for the past few years with this. Hosting controller. This one you can actually make private because we don't have any Objective-C or overrides. Func setup views. And in here, we're going to say title equals home. Okay, so like I said, this might look like overkill. You could honestly plop this right inside these brackets here and just call it a day and just say title equals home from here. I like to be very, very consistent with all my code, just so I don't have to think about stuff as much. It's more like the burden of knowledge or the burden of creativity, right? So like I said, this is all my own preference. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying this is the way I do it, and I just try to be consistent. So what we just did was we actually defined the title on this screen. Without this, SwiftUI is not going to actually say anything about the title. Again, we don't really want to configure this from the SwiftUI side because SwiftUI tends to just hijack a lot of the navigation bar. And a lot of times, if you try to set the navigation bar from the SwiftUI side, this will actually move down, and you'll have two navigation bars up here. I tried to take a look into it. I could not figure out why that is. It seems like SwiftUI has its own navigation bar or something like that. But if any of you who are watching this video know the answer to that, leave a message in the comments below. I'm not going to take a look into that too much. I'm just going to say from my experience, trying to set this from the SwiftUI side has seen issues. So all I do is I just set it from the UIKit side. That's it. We're done. So at that point, if we go into the app nav coordinator on the home screen, we can, for right now, I'm going to comment this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to just say let view model. Actually, it's pretty much the same. The difference is home view.view model. We're just doing that. guess I didn't actually. We'll just say init. Okay, so view model. Then you say let view equals home view dot init view model, and then here's the difference. We say let controller equals home hosting controller view model. At this point, everything else is the same. One thing that I almost missed is view model dot nav delegate equals self. So basically, the navigation is how I set up all my SwiftUI stuff. Is the view will pass actions to the view model, and the view model will then call back up to this nav coordinator. That's why we have the nav delegate equals self to handle navigation. I even do that in the SwiftUI version as well. Go back and watch those. Again, link in the description below for those. But that's the idea. I don't like having the view actually pass up navigation at all. Although it is a little bit different when I'm doing it from the UIKit side. If I have an UI view controller, navigation does tend to happen from the view controller side. But in any case, view passes off actions to the view model passes up navigation actions to the coordinator handles everything else. So now that we have the controller, so this is essentially a UI view controller at this point in time. All it's doing is it's hosting the SwiftUI view. So from here we can just say presenter.set view controllers controller animated true. And at the very end, for those of you, I will go over a little bit of the coordinator pattern in UIKit at the very end, but I don't want to go too crazy over that right now because I made another video for that. Okay, so if we just keep going here, login view, new file, and it's the same stuff over and over again. Login hosting controller. So much so, or if we go to the home hosting controller, we can just copy this stuff. Login hosting controller, just paste this and just rename this. Copy it down. Again. Login view, and we're done. So then we go down to the register view, new file, register hosting controller. Same thing. I'm just gonna paste this. Oh wait, I gotta copy it one more time here. Okay. Boom, we're done. There it is. That's all you need. If you didn't have a navigation title, you could just create that one line. You can just create this one line, and that's all you need. This one line right here handles everything for you. The hosting controller does everything else as far as actually showing the SwiftUI view. One thing to note that I did actually come across the other day is you can't actually add any views from the UIKit side unless it's to the navigation bar or it's something like a search controller. There are certain views you can add, but if you just try to pin a full screen view from the UIKit side, it's always going to show on top of the SwiftUI views. I tried to take a look into that again, and I couldn't find a way to actually, for instance, like put a background from the SwiftUI side, or sorry, from the UIKit side, and then have it show behind the SwiftUI views. It might be possible, but if anyone in the comment section below, has an answer to that, throw one in there. But I couldn't find one, so I always do all my background stuff from the SwiftUI side, which it still works. It's more than adequate. Okay, so go back to the app nav coordinator. Same thing. We're just going to whip this out. I know I'm saying init on these. This is just kind of like me going through this pretty quick. Usually you would just inject an existing object rather than initialize it. And I'm probably going to forget this at some point here, but I have delegate self. Stuff now. One last one. Now, real quick, before I run this, again, remember what I said about how SwiftUI needs the root screens here? Well, since it's UIKit, the presenter is a UI navigation controller here. There's only one in the app, and it's setting that as the root view controller of the entire screen. So there is technically like one object at the root that handles the navigation stack. The only difference is in UIKit, that's a controller object. It's not a view. And so you don't actually have to show something on screen before the nav stack actually, shows something else or handles other things. In SwiftUI, you have to have an existing visible view on screen before the path is valid and will add things to the screen. So what that looks like is just a UI navigation controller. This UI navigation controller, for anyone who's listening or watching who has never seen this before, this actually has a list of controllers in it. And that list is that path object, essentially. That's why when we set view controllers it's an array of view controllers. This is that path object. So technically speaking, you also have a path object in UIKit. But this controller is the first screen of the entire app. That's it. There's nothing else visible from this point. You can, I guess you could make the case that you can add a background to the UI navigation controller, but you're getting into kind of like, semantics at that point. But in any case, this is the pattern. Like all you do is you wrap hosted views in hosting controllers and you just present them normally in UIKit. That's it. Let's go ahead and run this. And we failed here because I spelled something wrong. I guarantee it. Register nav delegate. On login tapped. Which one is it? Is it the login tapped one? There we go. Network routes has nothing. Login data. Got to be consistent in your naming. Okay, let's bring this in here. So we got it. So here's the previous one that I had that was all built previously. So yeah, let's try to log in. I knew I was gonna forget one. I did not set the nav delegate. Let's see, app nav coordinator. Where's my login stuff? I knew I was gonna miss one. Okay, rebuild. It's probably going to go straight to the home screen. Yep. The reason it went to the home screen is because the last time I built it, it did actually fetch the access token and saved it, which is what we consider a logged in state. So let me just do that over again for everyone to see this time. There we go. And we can fetch that secure string from the backend. This is coming from the backend that I have running. Cool. And that's all there is to it. I think we can go to the register screen if we want. So again, there's definitely pros and cons to this. I'm not saying that this is like the end all be all, but I have seen, because SwiftUI is very new and because there are some issues, I have seen SwiftUI navigation affect even animations, even just custom spinners within the app. I've seen them say that the navigation stack, if you put animations within that, it can cause issues. I think that's actually fixed in iOS 17, but in any case, they're working out the kinks of the SwiftUI navigation. So it's up to the individual developer on if they want a robust system or if they want the latest and greatest, what they know, what they don't know, what kind of projects going to be working on. There's a whole lot of factors to this. But the nice thing is, and this is, I guess, why I wanted to show this, is you have a choice. You have a couple different tools at your disposal. One being SwiftUI navigation, if it's all going to be SwiftUI, and two, a more hybrid approach if you really need to make sure that you can swap it in and out. So for instance, if you don't want to bet 100% on SwiftUI yet, you don't have to, and you can use the best of both worlds. Or you can go back to UIKit if you really want to. Point being, you have the tools at your disposal to do the things that you need to get the job done on this. And with this, you get the little sandboxes to wrap your SwiftUI views in. And the nice thing is, if you ever have to if you use this pattern, you can slowly bring in SwiftUI on legacy projects and then sandbox them without affecting the rest of the system. So very composable architecture when you're using UIKit for navigation and still using SwiftUI views. There are some cons, again, that I said before, but in my opinion, it's the one I choose. Not saying that's the one you have to choose, but make a consideration for it. Think about what you want to do. Try it out in a small sample project, see if you like it, see if you don't like it, and make a conscious decision on whether or not you want to use it in the next project you have, or bring it into an existing one. Just trying to give you some tools here. Hope it's super helpful to you. Put a comment below if you have any questions on that, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Happy coding.